The big idea: can you inherit memories from your ancestors? The science of epigenetics suggests we can pass on trauma, but trust and compassion too. Since the sequencing of the human genome in 2003, genetics has become one of the key frameworks for how we all think about ourselves. From fretting about our health to debating how schools can accommodate non-neurotypical pupils, we reach for the idea that genes deliver answers to intimate questions about people's outcomes and identities. Recent research backs this up, showing that complex traits such as temperament, longevity, resilience to mental ill health, and even ideological leanings are all to some extent hardwired. I mean, I have mixed feelings about that, but it's one of those things that you have to look at both sides and like weigh both sides of it. That it's like probably a mixture of a lot of different things, but this is epigenetics definitely a part of it. But it would be interesting to see how epigenetics is related to people's political leanings and ideological leanings. That's really interesting. But environment matters too for these qualities, of course. Our education and life experiences interact with genetic factors to create a fantastically complex matrix of influence. But what if the question of genetic inheritance were even more nuanced? What if the old polarized debate about the competing influences of nature versus nurture was due for a 21st century upgrade? Scientists working in the emerging field of epigenetics have discovered that the mechanism that allows lived experience and acquired knowledge to be passed on within one generation by altering the shape of a particular gene. Again, this is not the information of the gene. It's saying that it's altering the shape of the gene. Normally, whenever at least whenever I went to school, I would always get told that like genes have their information, like the code of the gene changes. But this is just saying that the shape of the gene changes, which we learned about previously too, about this. So that's really interesting. This means that an individual's life experience doesn't die with them, but endures in genetic form. The impact of starvation your Dutch grandmother suffered during the Second World War, for example, or the trauma inflicted on your grandfather when he fled his home as a refugee, might go on to shape your parents' brains, their behaviors, and eventually yours too. Much of the epigenetic early work was performed in model organisms, including mice. My favorite study is one that left neuroscience community reeling when it was published in Nature Neuroscience in 2014. And I'm like reading an article here. It's not mine. This is the authors of the article. Carried out by Professor Carrie Resler at Emory University, Georgia, the study's findings neatly dissected the way in which a person's behaviors are affected by ancestral experience. The study made use of mice's love of cherries. Typically, when waft of sweet cherries scent reaches a mouse's nose, a signal is sent to the nucleus accumbens, causing this pleasure zone to light up and motivate the mouse to scurry around in search of a treat. The scientists exposed a group of mice first to a cherry-like smell and then immediately to a mild electric shock. The mice quickly learned to freeze in anticipation every time they smelled cherries. They had pups, and their pups were left to lead happy lives without electric shocks, though no access to any cherries. The pups grew up and had offspring of their own. At this point, the scientists took up the experiment. Could the acquired association of shock with sweet smell possibly have been transmitted to the third generation? It had. The grandpups were highly fearful of and more sensitive to the smell of cherries. How had this happened? The team discovered that DNA in the grandfather's mouse's sperm had changed shape. This, in turn, changed the way that neuronal circuit was laid down in his pups and their pups, rerouting some nerve cells from the nose away from the pleasure and rewarding circuits and connecting them to the amygdala, which is involved in fear. The gene for this olfactory receptor had been demethylated, chemically tagged, so that the circuits for detecting it were enhanced. Here, I just realized that it's really small. Let me zoom in case anybody's reading it on video. Sorry about that. Okay. The gene of this olfactory had been demethylated, chemically tagged, so that the circuits for detecting it were enhanced. Through a combination of these changes, the traumatic memories cascaded across generations to ensure the pups would acquire the hard-won wisdom that cherries might smell delicious, but were bad news. The study's author wanted to rule out the possibility that learning by imitation might have played a part, so they took some of the mice's descendants and fostered them out. They also took the sperm from the original traumatized mice, using IFV to conceive more pups and raise them away from their biological parents. The foster pups and those that had been conceived via IFV, which is like in vitro fertilization, like with a needle, still had increased sensitivity and different neural circuitry for the perception of that particular scent. Just to clinch things, pups of mice that had not experienced the traumatic linking of cherries with shocks did not see these changes even if they were fostered by parents who had. That's fascinating. The most exciting thing of all occurred when the researchers set out to investigate whether this effect could be reversed so that the mice could heal and other descendants may be spared this biological trauma. They took the grandparents and re-exposed them to the smell, this time without any accompanying shocks. After a certain amount of repetition of the pain-free experience, the mice stopped being afraid of the smell. Anatomically, their neural circuits reverted to the original format. Crucially, the traumatic memory was no longer passed on in the behavior and brain structure of new generations. That is fascinating. And I'm just gonna, this just popped into my head as I'm reading it, but I'm gonna tie this into the whole ET thing. That a lot of people say that they have ET experiences of them being operated on in some capacity, and they say that they're fixing their DNA. And if DNA trauma can be intergenerational, that would be affecting time. So coming back and doing this operation to stop the trauma theoretically would be stopping that trauma from going into the future. So they would be that's kind of time travel, but genetic time travel. And as well, a lot of the people that get abducted say that, well, not all of them, but some of the people with military abduction experiences say that they have their DNA checked, and that basically the military can see if you've been abducted or not by looking at your DNA. And it seems like that is definitely a thing, and it makes a lot of sense and checks out. And yeah, very, very interesting, kind of all links together there. So I'll talk about that, I'm sure, again in the future. So here we are. Could the same thing hold true for future generations? Studies on the Holocaust survivor and their children carried out in 2020 by Professor Rachel Yuda at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Medical School, New York, revealed that the effects of parental trauma can indeed be passed on in this way. Her first study showed that participants carried changes to a gene linked to levels of cortisol, which is involved in stress response. In 2021, Yuda and her team carried out more work to find expression changes in genes linked to immune system function. These changes weaken the barrier of white blood cells, which allows the immune system to get improperly involved in central nervous system. The interference has been linked to depression, anxiety, psychosis, and autism, which I don't know how they didn't list autoimmune diseases, but I mean, that sounds like the setup to an autoimmune disease, obviously. I don't know why they wouldn't say that, but which could come in a lot of different forms. But since then, Ressler and Yuta have collaborated with others to reveal epigenetic tags in PTSD-afflicted war zones exposed combatants. They're hoping this information could aid PTSD diagnosis or even preemptively screen for individuals who might be more prone to developing the condition before they enter the battlefield. And also, so they were talking about screening there, right there as well, screening individuals for their DNA epigenetically. So again, back to the alien thing, they're saying it right there. In all times and across all cultures, people have paid their dues to their ancestors and pondered the legacy that they will leave for their descendants. Few of us believe anymore that biology is necessarily destiny or that our bloodline determines who we are. And yet, the more we learn about how our body and mind work together to shape our experience, the more we can see that our life story is woven into our biology. It's not just our body that keeps the score, but our very genes, which we've talked about how having a bad day can affect your genes, like in the moment. That was like a couple episodes ago. So again, this is talking about that. And then that moment, if this isn't to stress you out, it's kind of just a funny thing, but it is important that it shows that like treating each other right is important. But if it's one of those things where you do the best you can, right? But so if you are having a lot of bad experiences, then not only does it affect your genes, but if you have children, it goes to their genes too, which that's kind of messed up. And as this next paragraph says, might this new understanding increase our capacity for self-awareness and empathy? If we can grasp the potential impact of our ancestors' experience on our own behavior, might we be more understanding of what others who are also carrying the inherited weight of the experience? We are, as far as we know, the only animals capable of cathedral thinking, working on projects over many generations for the benefit of those who come after. It's an idealistic way to think about legacy, but without it, we will struggle to tackle complex multi-generation challenges such as climate and ecological emergencies. Our knowledge of epigenetics and its potential to massively speed up evolutionary adaptation could support us to do everything we can to be the ancestors our descendants needed. Conflict, neglect, and trauma induce unpredictable and far-reaching changes, but so do trust, curiosity, and compassion. Doing the right thing today could indeed cascade across generations. So the last sentence right there basically, again, talks about time travel through DNA. Doing the right thing today could indeed cascade across generations. So it's weird how it's all coming back to the same stuff over and over. This is the last of the science articles, and it's from Popular Mechanics, and it was published last week. Every single cell in your body could be conscious, scientists say. That could rewrite everything we know about human evolution. If trillions of tiny bits of consciousness are floating around inside you, it could change how we think about life. Before you became you, your entire being was wrapped up in just 2 cells, your mother's egg and your father's sperm. Yet the dance between these two resulted in an embryo, a ball of cells that differentiated into specialized cells that would grow to become your heart, your gut, your fingers, and all other parts. The cells of your developing embryo constantly communicated with each other, including through a sense of touch, in part by extending tendrils to detect to the cells around them. Your body's cells perform incredible feats of communication and cooperation, like this right from the start. The reason for such cooperation comes down to a cellular form of intelligence, says evolutionary biologist and physician William B. Miller. He's the co-author of the book The Sentient Cell: The Cellular Foundations of Consciousness, published in January 2024, which proposes a radical new way of thinking about some of life's tiniest components. Miller is a small but growing group of scientists who believe we should no longer think of cells as passive robots that automatically follow a code of instructions, carrying out orders from our genome like mindless drones. Instead, they say, the roughly 37 trillion cells that make up our own bodies are conscious, and that life and consciousness began at the same time. It's a revolutionary idea, Miller tells Popular Mechanics, but assuming cells have a form of consciousness can give us a better understanding of complex processes. These include cellular communication and decision-making, and even the motivation behind embryonic cells specializing into a specific organ. While it's not widely accepted among scientists, this concept of existential consciousness will profoundly transform the way that we approach cellular bioengineering problems like tissue regeneration, provide a different perspective on finding cures for diseases like cancer, and even help us survive on Mars, Miller says. Now, in May 2024, paper published in peer-reviewed journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, Miller and his fellow authors argue that random chance did not govern the concept of natural selection. That's what the 1850s naturalist Charles Darwin, known for establishing the theory of evolution, thought. Instead, the authors contend that a form of cellular consciousness actually drove life's evolution, and it's a reason behind all of life's existence. So we have to read that sentence again. Instead, the authors contend that a form of cellular consciousness actually drove life's evolution, and it's the actual reason behind all of life's existence. Wow. Consciousness at the level of the cell cannot produce a human being's own complex thoughts, feelings, and sensations. A cell doesn't have the capacity for abstract thought. But here how it does work, says Miller. Imagine a typical situation. Daylight in a cell's environment hits the cell's external membrane and passes through it. The cell measures that light signal internally, forming a piece of information about the light. Because it has to analyze it internally, that becomes an experience as the cell analyzes that light to support the state it prefers to be in, Miller says. While that example is of a bacterial cell, all cells absorb various data from their surroundings, analyze them, and make decisions about the actions they should take, such as producing a hormone or moving in a particular direction, perhaps towards the light. From early in life's history, cells of all kinds have combined their skills to further a common goal, to keep on living and reproducing. That's kind of a trippy thought when you think about that all of the cells in history all have been working together, combining their skills to further a common goal, to keep on living and reproducing. Cells have formed colonies. It's very much like a city, what we and humans might engineer. It has nutrient channels, and outside and inside a collective metabolism, Miller says. For example, microbes collaborate with each other. They're codependent, trading resources as well as competing. In order to make this ecology flourish, each of these cells is taking intelligent action. They're communicating with one another, and both individually and collectively deploying resources. That's problem solving and decision making. That's cognitive action. And it's one element of consciousness. It's still hard it's still a hard concept to swallow that bacteria and other microorganisms are conscious on any level. To animals like us, consciousness is due to a complex nervous system. However, Miller and his fellow authors see this higher form of consciousness as a natural property our cells create, together with more than 10 trillion essential microbes that are part of our bodies. Every aspect of consciousness that I'm experiencing is a simultaneous aggregation of the consciousness of all my cells and all of those microbes working in tandem, coordinating so seamlessly that I feel like I'm one individual. That's really, really trippy to think about. 10 trillion microbes all simultaneously aggregating their perceptions and energy stimuli, i.e. consciousness, and working in tandem are coordinating so seamlessly that they're making the individual listening to this right now. It's really strange. And then whenever you go back to what they were saying up here, that these bacteria have been working together through time, it almost goes back to that time travel thing of like life and consciousness traveling through time, and it like leading to somewhere. It's kind of interesting, and that we're just like the vessels carrying through this consciousness. It's almost like the conscious versus unconscious mind, or subconscious mind. That subconsciously, like we know what we're doing, but our like conscious mind, we don't know what we're doing. And subconsciously, I guess we're all linking together on, with the planet. We've already learned about the Schumann resonance, but now we're learning about the cells.